This photo sat in a museum basement for over 100 years. No one noticed what was hidden in her eyes. A single photograph, taken in 1888, inside a modest portrait studio. A black family, dressed in their finest clothes, gazing straight into the camera with quiet, unshakable dignity. For over a century, the image sat forgotten in an archive. Just another relic of the past. But when modern geneticists used advanced imaging technology to examine the matriarch's eyes, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. A pattern in her irises, a genetic signature that reached back across an ocean, through centuries of history, to African royalty the world had tried to forget. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was evidence of a bloodline that slavery tried to erase. If you want to find out how one photograph rewrote history and reunited a family with a royal heritage they never knew they had stick around, subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get into it. You will not believe where this story goes. Dr. Maya Richardson stood in the climate-controlled basement archive of the Smithsonian Institution, surrounded by cardboard boxes that somehow still carried the smell of dust and time. She had been working on the African American Heritage Photography Project for 3 months now, cataloging thousands of images from the post-Civil War era. Most of the photographs were damaged, faded, barely identifiable. But this particular morning in March of 2019, she opened a box labeled Virginia Studios, 1880-1890, and found something that made her stop cold. The photograph was remarkably well preserved. A family of 6, seated and standing in a formal studio arrangement, a painted garden backdrop behind them typical of the era. The father stood tall in a dark suit, one hand resting on the shoulder of his seated wife. 4 children surrounded them, 2 boys and 2 girls, dressed in their Sunday best. Their expressions were solemn, dignified, almost regal. Maya lifted the photograph carefully and turned it over. A stamp on the back read, J. Morrison Studio, Richmond, Virginia, September 1888. She had catalogued hundreds of portraits like this one. But something about this photograph felt different. The way this family held themselves suggested a pride that went far beyond their circumstances. She set the image on her light table, reached for her magnifying glass and began her standard documentation process: age, condition, subjects, location. But when she leaned in to examine the details more closely, her breath caught. The woman at the center, the matriarch. Her eyes were unlike anything Maya had ever seen in a photograph from this period. Even through the sepia tones, even through the limitations of 19th century photography, there was a clarity to them that shouldn't have been possible with the technology of 1888. Maya sat back, frowning. She knew what was typical for the era: the slow emulsions, the long exposures, the primitive lenses. Eyes in old portraits were usually dark, soft-edged, lacking detail. Not this woman's eyes. They were sharp, almost luminous. And there was a pattern in the irises Maya couldn't quite make out with a magnifying glass alone. She glanced at the clock. Nearly noon. Her colleague, Dr. James Chen, ran the digital imaging lab upstairs. If anyone could tell her whether she was seeing something real or just imagining it, it was him. Maya slipped the photograph into a protective sleeve and headed for the elevator. James looked up from his monitor the moment Maya walked in, the sleeve cradled against her chest like it held something fragile and rare. He'd worked with her long enough to know that look. "What have you got?" he asked, rolling his chair back from the desk. "I'm not sure yet," Maya admitted, laying the photograph gently on the scanning bed. "But there's something about this woman's eyes. I need the highest resolution scan you can give me." James raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He trusted her instincts by now. He adjusted the settings on the archival grade scanner and started the capture. The machine hummed softly as it recorded every microscopic detail of the 131-year-old image. 5 minutes later, the file opened on his monitor. He pulled it into his imaging software and began to zoom in on the matriarch's face. Maya stood behind him, gripping the back of his chair. "There," she whispered, pointing. "Do you see it?" James leaned in, zoomed further. focused entirely on the woman's left eye until the iris filled the screen. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The pattern was unmistakable, even through the grain of 19th century photography, even through a century and a third of aging paper. The structure of her iris showed a distinct configuration: deep radial furrows, an unusually pronounced collarette, and an arrangement of crypts that formed an almost geometric design. That's James started, then stopped himself. He opened another window and pulled up a research database he'd been using for an unrelated genetics project, an experimental iris pattern recognition tool built to cross-reference documented genetic markers. He fed in the pattern from the photograph, adjusting for the age and quality of the image, and let it run. 30 seconds later, the results came back. James sat back hard in his chair. "Maya," he said slowly, "this pattern is tied to a specific genetic lineage. It's rare, we're talking less than 0.1% of the global population." He scrolled, his expression darkening with focus. "And according to this, it's associated with one particular ancestral line out of West Central Africa." Maya's heart was pounding. "Can you be more specific?" James clicked through several more screens, then turned to look at her directly. "Angola," he said. "Specifically, the royal line of the pre-colonial kingdom of Ndongo." 2 days later, Maya sat across from Dr. Patricia Okonkwo in a small, book-lined office at Howard University. Patricia was one of the country's leading genealogists, specializing in African-American family history, particularly families whose trail ran straight into the machinery of slavery. Her walls were covered in family trees, maps of the transatlantic slave trade, and photographs of people she'd helped reconnect with lost histories. Maya had brought the original photograph and James's full digital analysis. Patricia examined everything with the unhurried care of someone who understood that these fragments were often all a family had left. "The iris pattern is definitive?" Patricia asked, looking up from the genetic report. "According to the research database, yes," Maya said. "This configuration is linked almost exclusively to descendants of the Ndongo royal line, the kingdom Queen Nzinga ruled." "I know the history," Patricia said gently. "Nzinga, one of Africa's great rulers. She held off Portuguese colonization for nearly 40 years. She looked back down at the photograph. "And you're telling me this woman photographed in Richmond, Virginia in 1888 carries her bloodline?" "That's what the evidence suggests." Patricia went quiet, studying the matriarch's face for a long moment. "Do we have anything on the family? Names? Anything written on the photo itself?" Maya shook her head. "Just the studio stamp. J. Morrison, Richmond. I've been through Richmond city records from that period, but without names. It's like searching in the dark." "Morrison." Patricia's eyes lit up. "I know that name. John Morrison was one of the only photographers in Richmond who regularly took portraits of black families in that era. He kept detailed ledgers." She reached for her laptop and pulled up a database she'd built over 20 years of research. "I have scans of some of his records. Let's see." She scrolled through pages of faded, handwritten entries, dates, names, payment amounts, brief descriptions of each sitting. Here, she turned the screen toward Maya. "September 14th, 1888, family portrait, 6 subjects. Name given as she squinted, reading carefully, the Thomas family. No first names, but there's an address. 4112 Clay Street, Richmond." Maya leaned forward, pulse quickening. "That's them. It has to be. Same date, same number of people." "Morrison charged $2 for this sitting," Patricia said. "That was a fortune for a family like this in 1888. They saved for this. They wanted to be remembered," Maya said quietly. Maya arrived in Richmond on a gray Thursday morning. The city had changed almost beyond recognition since 1888, but pieces of the past still surfaced here and there: old brick facades, church steeples rising above the modern skyline. She went straight to the Library of Virginia, where Patricia had arranged access to 19th century city directories and census records. The reading room was hushed, occupied by a handful of researchers hunched over their own investigations into the past. A librarian named Mr. Lawson brought her what she'd requested: Richmond city directories from 1885 to 1890, census records from 1880 and 1900, and property tax rolls from the same window. Maya started with the 1888 directory, running her finger down the listings for Clay Street until she found it. 412 Clay Street. Thomas Samuel Carpenter. Her hand trembled slightly as she copied it down. Samuel Thomas. The man in the photograph, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. A carpenter. She moved next to the 1880 census, searching Richmond's rolls for Samuel Thomas, and found him on the 4th page. Samuel Thomas, age 24, black, carpenter, born in Virginia. Listed just beneath him his wife. Grace Thomas, age 22, born in Virginia. Maya's breath caught. Grace, the matriarch, finally had a name. She scanned the notes column, mostly blank on every other line, but next to Grace's name someone had written, in small, cramped handwriting, midwife. Healer. 4 children were listed below: Robert, age 5, Elizabeth, age 4, Thomas Jr., age 2, Mary, age 1. The same 4 children who would stand for that photograph 8 years later. But it was the next column that stopped Maya cold. Parents' birthplace: 1 field for father, 1 for mother. For both Samuel and Grace, the father's birthplace read Virginia. For Grace's mother, someone had written, unknown, possibly foreign. In 1880, for a black woman in Virginia, that notation was extraordinary. It hinted at something that didn't fit the usual story of people born enslaved in the American South. Maya texted Patricia immediately. Found them. Samuel and Grace Thomas. Something strange about Grace's mother. Patricia called back within minutes. Churches, she said, without preamble. If Grace was a midwife and healer in the black community, the churches will have her. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, they kept better records than the city ever did, especially for black families. Maya spent the rest of the day visiting Richmond's oldest black congregations. Many of the original buildings had been demolished or relocated over the decades, but 3 still stood from the 1880s: First African Baptist, Ebenezer Baptist, and St. Philip's Episcopal. It was in a small archive room at Ebenezer Baptist, thick with the smell of old paper and lemon oil, that she finally found what she was looking for. Reverend Marcus Williams, a man in his 70s who served as the church's unofficial historian, brought out a leather-bound ledger dated 1875. "We've kept records since 1802, he said, with quiet pride. Baptisms, marriages, deaths. This community has always understood that memory matters. Maya opened the ledger carefully. Elegant handwriting filled every page: names, dates, small personal notes. She searched the baptism records first and found all 4 Thomas children: Robert in 1876, Elizabeth in 1877, Thomas Jr. in 1879, Mary in 1880. Parents listed as Samuel and Grace Thomas. Then she flipped back further to 1874 and found an entry that made her pulse jump. Marriage: Samuel Thomas to Grace Oladele. October 3rd, 1874. Witnesses: Jacob Freeman, Ruth Freeman. Oladele. Not a common name in Virginia, not a common name anywhere in America in 1874. Maya photographed the page with trembling hands. Reverend Williams leaned over her shoulder to read it. "Oladele," he said slowly. "That's a Yoruba name from what's now Nigeria." He paused. "But a lot of enslaved people taken from Angola were given Yoruba names by the traders who moved them. The cultures got tangled together somewhere in the crossing." Maya looked up. "Is there anything else on Grace? Any other records?" The Reverend thought a moment, then pulled a second ledger from a different shelf: testimonies given by new church members in the 1870s. "Here," he said, flipping pages. Grace Oladele joined the church in 1873, before her marriage. There's a note from Reverend Johnson. Maya read the faded script. "Grace came to us with unusual knowledge of healing herbs. claims her mother taught her. Mother deceased. Grace will not speak of her origins. It was a strange note. If Grace's mother had died the day Grace was born, as later evidence would confirm, she couldn't have taught Grace anything directly. Maya filed the contradiction away, a loose thread she couldn't yet explain. Maya returned to Washington with more questions than answers. She had a name now, Grace Oladele, but the mystery had only deepened. Why wouldn't Grace speak of her origins? What had happened to her mother? And how, exactly, did a woman living in post-Civil War Virginia carry the genetic signature of Angolan royalty in her eyes? Back at the Smithsonian, she met with James and Patricia over video call. James had been running further analysis on the iris pattern against expanded genetic databases. Patricia had been combing through slave ship manifests and auction records, hunting for any trace of the name Oladele. "I found something," Patricia said, her face serious on the screen. A ship called the Esperana docked in Charleston, South Carolina in 1847. Portuguese vessel, out of Luanda, Angola. The manifest lists 217 enslaved people, though I'd bet the true number who boarded was higher. Before the crossing. Maya leaned toward her screen. "Did you find the name?" "No, but I found something else." Patricia's voice tightened. "There's a notation about a woman and her young daughter separated from the rest of the group on arrival. Described as a special acquisition, sold privately instead of at the general auction." The note reads, "The woman claimed to be of royal blood." For a moment, nobody spoke. "Do we have any way to confirm this was Grace's mother?" James finally asked. "Not directly," Patricia admitted, "but the timing works. If Grace was born around 1858 and this woman arrived in 1847, there's an 11-year gap which fits with what we know so far, and the fact that she and her daughter were pulled aside and sold privately tells us somebody, somewhere, believed her claim, or at least saw value in it." Maya looked down at the photograph on her desk. Grace's face stared back across 130 years. "We need to know what happened to that woman and her daughter after Charleston," she said. "Where they went, how they ended up in Virginia." "I'll search the Charleston private sale ledgers," Patricia said. Wealthy families sometimes kept careful records of what they bought, especially when they paid a premium. "And I'll keep pushing the genetic side," James added. "If we can find living descendants of the Thomas family, DNA testing could confirm the royal lineage for good." Maya picked the photograph back up, studying Grace's eyes. Somewhere in them was a story that had stayed hidden for over 170 years. A story of queens and kingdoms, of survival and of silence. 3 weeks later, Patricia called with news that changed everything. She'd found a private sale record buried in the archives of the Middleton family, a wealthy Charleston plantation dynasty known for keeping meticulous accounts of every purchase. Her name was Nzinga, Patricia said, her voice thick. The woman who came off the Esperana in 1847. The buyer, Charles Middleton, wrote in his private ledger that she claimed descent from Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba. He didn't believe her, but he bought her anyway. Because she was young and strong. The child with her was about 2 years old. He never recorded the girl's name. Maya closed her eyes, letting the weight of it settle. She named herself after the queen, she said. Or maybe she really was descended from her. There's more, Patricia went on. The ledger shows Nzinga was sold again in 1852 to a Virginia tobacco planter named Richard Blackwell. Her and her daughter both. Blackwell's land sat about 30 miles south of Richmond. What happened to them there? I don't know yet. But I found a reference to it in the Blackwell family papers. At the Virginia Historical Society. I'm driving up tomorrow. Meet me there? The next afternoon, Maya and Patricia sat together in the reading room of the Virginia Historical Society, boxes of Blackwell correspondence stacked around them. They found the answer in a letter dated 1858, written by Richard Blackwell's wife, Eleanor, to her sister in Maryland. Eleanor had written, "The African woman Nzinga died in childbirth last week. She delivered a girl child who survived. The infant is remarkably beautiful, with unusual eyes. I have decided the child will be kept in the house and trained as a lady's maid. The other daughter, who must be near 13 now, works the kitchen. She carries her mother's healing knowledge and has already saved 3 of our own children from fever this year. Richard wishes to sell her. I have forbidden it. Maya looked up at Patricia. The baby born in 1858, that's Grace. And the older daughter was her half-sister, born in Africa or somewhere on the crossing. Patricia's hands were shaking as she set the page down. That means Grace never knew her mother. Nzinga died the day Grace was born. Neither of them spoke for a while. They sat with it, a woman dying in childbirth on a Virginia plantation. An ocean away from the home she'd been stolen from, and a newborn girl opening her eyes for the first time, carrying inside them the genetic proof of everything her mother had claimed and never lived to prove. It also explained the church record. Claims her mother taught her. Grace hadn't meant Nzinga. She'd meant the sister who raised her, the only mother she'd ever known. Healing knowledge and all. Now Maya needed a living descendant. The photograph and the paper trail told a remarkable story, but only Dina could make it undeniable. She started with the 1900 census, tracing the family forward. Samuel had died in 1895. Grace lived until 1912. Their 4 children had grown, married, and had children of their own. The trail eventually led to a woman named Dorothy Williams, 76 years old, living in Philadelphia, the great-great-granddaughter of Robert Thomas, the oldest boy in the photograph. Maya called her on a Tuesday evening, heart pounding. The phone rang 3 times before a warm voice picked up. "Mrs. Williams, my name is Dr. Maya Richardson. I'm a historian with the Smithsonian, and I've been researching your family. I believe I found a photograph from 1888 of your great-great-grandparents." A long pause. "You found a picture of my people?" "Yes, ma'am. Your great-great-grandfather, Samuel Thomas, your great-great-grandmother, Grace, and their 4 children. Taken in Richmond." Dorothy's voice broke. "We don't have a single picture from back then. Family stories always said a portrait was made once, but it got lost during the Depression when my grandmother had to move. We wished for years we could see their faces." Maya felt her own eyes sting. "Mrs. Williams, I'd like to bring the photograph to you in person, but there's something else. We've made a discovery about your great-great-grandmother, Grace, something remarkable about where she came from. Would you be willing to take a DNA test?" "What kind of discovery?" Maya chose her words carefully. "We have strong evidence that Grace's mother came from Angola, from a royal line. The genetic markers suggest Grace may have descended from one of the most powerful queens in African history." The silence stretched so long Maya thought the call had dropped. Then Dorothy spoke again, steady despite the emotion underneath it. "My grandmother used to tell me about Grace," she said. "Said she had healing hands. Said she could look at you and see what was wrong, deep down inside. Said Grace had eyes that seemed to know things. Old things." Dorothy paused. "And she said Grace used to tell her children, remember, you come from kings and queens. Never forget it." 6 weeks later, Maya returned with James and Patricia, this time to Philadelphia. They found Dorothy's living room full of family, her daughter Karen beside her, her grandson Marcus, a history student, standing by the window. 3 generations, all waiting for the truth. James opened his laptop and pulled up the results. He'd compared Dorothy's DNA sample against the markers found in Grace's iris in the photograph, then cross-referenced everything against genetic databases from Angola. "The results are definitive," he said. "Dorothy, you carry the same genetic markers we identified in your great-great-grandmother's eyes. They're extremely rare, found in less than 0.1% of the global population. And they match the signature of the Ndongo royal line." He pulled up a chart. Queen Nzinga ruled Ndongo and Matamba from 1624 until her death in 1663, resisting Portuguese colonization for nearly the whole of it, protecting her people and their independence. Based on the genetic evidence, Grace was her direct descendant, several generations removed. Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. Karen reached over. and gripped her other hand. Marcus leaned in toward the screen. "How does that even happen?" he asked. "How does a queen's descendant end up enslaved in Virginia?" Patricia told them everything about Nzinga, the woman who came off the Esperana in 1847 claiming royal blood, sold privately in Charleston, then again to the Blackwell plantation, dying in childbirth in 1858 without ever seeing home again. "Your great-great-grandmother Grace never knew her mother," Patricia said gently. "But she carried her legacy anyway in the healing knowledge passed down through her older half-sister. And in her eyes, those same eyes that looked into a camera lens in 1888, holding a secret that would take 131 years to uncover." Maya set the photograph on the coffee table. Dorothy leaned forward, seeing her ancestors' faces for the first time in her life, tracing a finger over Grace's image over those eyes that had carried her heritage across a century and a third of silence. "She looks like my grandmother," Dorothy whispered, "and like my mother, and like Karen." She looked up, tears on her face. "All this time we had the stories. We never had proof. We never had this." Marcus picked up the photograph carefully. "She looks like a queen, because she was descended from one," James said quietly. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in September, 131 years, almost to the day, since the original sitting, Dorothy and her family stood inside the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The photograph that had started it all now sat in the permanent collection, alongside the documentation of Grace's royal lineage. But this gathering wasn't about an exhibit. It was about family. Working with Patricia, Dorothy had traced every branch of the Thomas family tree, and today more than 40 descendants of Samuel and Grace had come from across the country to stand in one room. Many were meeting each other for the very first time. Maya watched them gather around a large screen showing the digitally restored photograph. She saw Grace's features echoed in face after face, the same set jaw, the same unshaken bearing, and in a few of them, that same distinctive pattern in the eyes. An older man named Joseph, who'd flown in from Atlanta, stood staring at the image of his great-great-grandfather. "I have his carpentry tools," he said quietly, "passed down through the family. I never knew what he looked like, not until today." A young woman named Aaliyah, Dorothy's great-niece, stood beside her. She had Grace's eyes, that same unusual iris pattern that had started this entire search. When James tested her DNA as part of the wider family study, the royal markers had come back unmistakable. "I always felt like there was something about our family," Aaliyah said. "Some story we were missing. My grandmother used to say we came from greatness. She didn't know how or why. She just felt it in her bones." Dorothy addressed the room, her voice steady and clear. "Grace died in 1912, never knowing the truth about her mother would ever be found. She never knew science would one day prove what Nzinga always claimed, that she was descended from a warrior queen who stood against an empire and would not bend. But Grace knew her own worth. She knew her own strength, and she made sure every one of her children knew theirs too." She looked around the room, at doctors, teachers, artists, parents, students, all of them carrying Grace forward into the future without ever knowing it, until now. "This photograph was supposed to be a memory," Dorothy said. "Samuel and Grace paid $2 they could barely spare, so their children would remember their faces. But it became something more than that. It became proof. Proof that our ancestors weren't only survivors, they were royalty. And that is something nobody can ever take from us again." Marcus lifted his phone and took a picture of everyone gathered together. History, repeating itself. Another family portrait. Another moment. Preserved, but this time they already knew exactly who they were.